Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of my book, Cult Conversations, The Influence Continuum. And I'm so excited to have a celebrity on my show. I'm kind of joking in a way, but not really. David Pakman has a new book out, and as soon as I heard him interviewed, I'm like, hey, Dave, would you come on my show, The Echo Machine, How Right-Wing Extremism Created a Post-Truth America? And Dave, you are a media monster. You have 3 million subscribers to your YouTube channel. And I find your approach so down to earth, practical, human, avoiding a lot of polemical, things and trying to get at the meat of things. And before we started recording, I said, I'm on chapter 8 on the Audible, but I bought the hardcover too, because I wanted to hold it up for this. But thank you for writing this, because it's really important now, especially important that people protect their minds and understand this media landscape, echo chamber. So with that, I'm going to pitch the ball to you about this fine book. I mean, I can ask you more specific questions, but you are an expert, and you used to having an audience to say the key points that you want to convey. So for listeners who may not have listened to your show or seen me on your show, tell us about you and why you wrote this book and what you hope to accomplish.
Well, I mean, I think to start with the book, there are really, if I were to summarize it very succinctly,
yes,
there are 3 kind of main points in the book. Number one is that I see Trump more as a consequence of a process that started with opposition to the civil rights movement in the late 50s. So it's sort of like the pot of coal at the end of the rainbow, to use a metaphor.
If I can interrupt you for a second and just say that I had a similar approach with the cult of Trump, that this is a symptom that's been developing for 50 years. I went a little bit earlier than Newt Gingrich and the Tea Party, but forgive me for interrupting. Keep going.
Yeah, so it's really a process, and Trump happened to be the charismatic, by a certain definition, strongman who said at the perfect time, I have the solutions to some legitimate problems. So that's point number one. Point number 2, all of this is bolstered by a dearth of critical thinking ability and media literacy skills, to some degree by design, if you look at what Republicans have done to state boards of education across the country. And sort of the best vaccine against this is better educated people when it comes to those skills. And then point number 3, that a lot of the specific problems we're dealing with right now, we often hear from the American right, oh, we can't solve it like Denmark or Portugal or this country or that country, because the US is either too big, too populous, too heterogeneous, whatever. That's really not true. That actually we do have models around the world for solving some of our bigger problems that, if not exactly, we could generally follow to solve some of the issues we're dealing with in education or healthcare or in other places. If I were to really distill the book down, those would be kind of the 3 major points.
Yeah, and I really found your chapter defining social democracy versus the kind of caricatured version of socialism that they use, particularly enlightening. And it was a very well-researched book, because I didn't know a lot of the things you were teaching about these other countries and the changes that they made to both take care of their people, but also encourage capitalism and market share and other things.
Yeah, I mean, I think a 4th point, if we were to add one, which is funny because I've done some interviews with sort of like anti-communist, anti-socialist shows. I'll sort of stop and say, hey, just so we're on the same page, you understand social democracy is capitalism, right? And sort of like half of them do and half of them don't. But the framework I'm talking about, which there are sort of shadows of in places like Denmark and Sweden and in other places, it's a form of capitalism that has a little more regulation than we have in the United States. It's
Right.
not socialism and it's not communism. And, interestingly, most people agree in the United States, we should socialize the military. We shouldn't have a bunch of private armies where we say, well, in Iraq, we'll use this army, or we do have mercenary groups, but for the most part, we agree like law enforcement, military, firefighting, the roads, interstate highway system. We've socialized all of those things, and most everybody agrees.
Mm-hmm.
Social democracy says there's a few other areas that there's good reason to take them out of the market. Healthcare is usually one. Education is often one. That's really what we're talking about. And so it's been interesting and enlightening to talk to some of these folks where some of them don't even realize I'm not advocating for socialism in the book.
Yeah, and most people are ignorant what socialism is.
That's right.
And they don't understand that what we're really considering is how to take care of everybody and not have this disparate, multi-billionaire class, and mostly everyone else is struggling to get by. And these other societies, because they have universal health care, because they don't privatize their jails, and they want people to get better and get out and be part of society and educate them, and that's a big missing piece for Americans is people aren't educated with civics. I mean, I'm old, so I learned civics. I took American history. I understand the concept of balance of powers and the responsibility of individual citizens. But so many people just have logged out of being a participatory democracy.
Yeah, and I think it's also fair to say, part of that log out has been sociocultural in the sense that, I know a lot of people who they don't read books. It's just not, they didn't grow up doing it. Their only experience was stuff that was assigned in school. They just don't read. So there's like a sociocultural aspect to it. But also, I don't think the left in the US has done a good enough job of linking the problems you're facing on a day-to-day basis to who our elected officials are. And so in a sense, it's logical if you don't connect the problems you are facing to voting as a minimum level of engagement. It sort of is logical that you wouldn't care about voting and you wouldn't care about civics. So I think we also need to do a better job of that.
Right. So I'm going to try to unpack a little bit more from what I've discerned from your book so far. But I guess at this moment in time, I'm thinking less left and right and more progressive human rights versus authoritarianism, because I see authoritarianism on the left in those spaces too. And people forget China is communist. It's authoritarian left, and it's like not what we're wanting to identify with at all.
That's really interesting you mentioned that. I'm not going to write this book, but I thought about writing a second book about the breaking of the left-right political spectrum as a both a descriptor, but also as an actual sort of spectrum that functions. I decided I don't want to write that book, and there's been some good books written about that. I have made clear, though, I use left and right because I want to be understood. And sometimes when you impose your own language on something, it might be more accurate, but if nobody else understands what you're talking about, it's kind of pointless.
Right.
But one of the things that I try to do when I can is really think about a sort of four-way matrix where we have sort of social conservatism and liberalism. So like, what are your views on things like gay rights and what we might sort of consider social issues.
Right.
And then where are you on the libertarian, authoritarian kind of scale?
Mm-hmm.
I consider myself a libertarian, but a lowercase L. And sometimes people say, oh, you're talking like you're part of the Libertarian Party. And I say, no. What I mean by libertarian is unless I have a really good reason to say government should be involved in something, my default is to say, let's not involve government there. And there are lots of places where I can make a really good case for government involvement, regulations in many industries, healthcare, the areas we're talking about. But so I would be what I would describe as a socially progressive libertarian. And I think that that has so much more depth than left and right, in particular, because as you say, you know, a lot of the things you hear from MAGA today sound like things you used to hear from the left about anti-war and whatever else. Now, are they genuine is a different question, but it doesn't matter. It sounds sort of left in some ways. Right. We've also seen this authoritarian movement on the left, which I know you've been critical of and I've been critical of as well. So I think all of this to say, we can imagine this 4-quadrant matrix that can maybe be a little more accurate than left and right.
Right. But I guess I'm going to say that I really think crypto is a scam, and a lot of crypto tech people are pushing crypto. Which, if we're going to have a society where we're paying for police and fire and healthcare and everything, we can't change the denomination of our money. But I'm very worried about that.
I mean, my view on crypto, I'm a big fan of the technology scholar Neil Postman, who wrote some really interesting books, Technopoly and Amusing Ourselves to Death. And his view about any new technology was essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, and if he were alive today, he would be able to give us much more depth. But his view on any new technology was, number one, usually it's futile to resist it. Thinking back to when people were worried that vehicles would put all of the horse buggy drivers out of a job. Okay, that might have been a legitimate concern at the time, but the idea that we would resist it based on that feels unlikely. So
yeah, I agree with that.
First framework, unlikely that we would resist these technologies. Most technologies have an upside and a downside. And usually the best approach is to use regulation and social pressure to maximize the good and limit the bad. So, for example, I've had Bitcoin for over 10 years in a proportion to my assets that I think is safe given its speculative nature. And it just kind of sits there and it's fine. And everyone I know who owns Bitcoin is not using it for fraud nor crimes or whatever. In addition to this, there have been all of these fraudulent crypto projects, pump and dumps, cash grabs, and rug pulls. I think that it's a relatively small portion. I don't think it means the technology is objectively bad, but it shows that we have no functioning regulatory infrastructure right now. And Neil Postman would say that's really what we need.
Right. Well, I'm all for regulation, but they aren't. The people pushing Bitcoin do not want regulation at all.
Some of them don't, yeah.
And because I've helped people in multi-level marketing cults, when I first learned, nobody knows who started it. They think it's Musk and Thiel and a few other of the PayPal mafia people. But the idea is you have a dream and you get buy-in, and the more people who pay money, the people at the top get enriched even more. And the question is, will there be value at the bottom levels? With MLMs, people lose 98 or 99% of everything. That's right. But the big threat for me is if the world goes off the dollar and goes to crypto, as Trump is saying he wants to make America the crypto capital, where's society?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I honestly think Trump doesn't care about it other than can he make money from his Trump coin, which he did. And he's now sort of not mentioned crypto for a while.
No, it's in the news today, actually, again.
Oh, what's happening today?
He's saying, you can get a dinner with me if you buy my coin.
No, but it's still, again, that's Trump coin to get a dinner with Trump. But the whole idea of a Bitcoin reserve and all of the stuff, he hasn't mentioned it for months. I don't even think he understands it, quite frankly. But there's no doubt that if the world moved away from the dollar as a reserve currency, it's not good for people who work and live with the dollar.
And people who've saved all their 401ks and Social Security and that sort of thing.
Right.
That's really great. So let's get into the whole your dissection of how we know what is a fact versus what is an opinion, and also the difference between pushing policies versus cultural warrior, memes.
Where to start? Let's see. So,
well, read the book, people. You'll get a deeper thing, but I want him to give you a taste.
Give me a little more direction in terms of which aspect of this you want me to talk about.
Now you've flipped it back to me, and I'm trying to remember what I said first and what I said second.
Well, as far as the fact opinion thing,
yes, please.
Of course, I have a political perspective, and that is not hidden in the book. But when we have a problem in the country, and it's a bipartisan problem, I just write in the book that it's a bipartisan problem. And so one of the kind of pillars of media literacy is being able to identify, am I watching or listening to or reading something that is ostensibly reporting or something that is ostensibly opinion? And you might think that this is really easy to do. But in the book, I cite a study from Pew, which found that when given 10 statements and asked to identify, is this a fact or is this an opinion? Republicans are pretty bad at it, but Democrats are almost as bad. This was really a bipartisan issue. So if I were to say to you, blue is the best color, we of course know that that's an opinion. And similar sort of statements were given to folks. And it was something like 60% of Republicans and almost 50% of Democrats got at least some of these wrong. So that's like a structural problem where if we ask ourselves, how does the mis and disinformation spread like wildfire on Facebook? How do people believe stuff like they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, and this sort of thing?
Right.
Part of it is a lot of people don't even know the difference between fact and opinion as a sort of structural issue.
Right.
That's a major problem to overcome.
Yep. Yeah. And so I love that you point out the difference between critical thinking and media literacy, because they're two different things, and you cover both. You talk.
That's right.
You talk about the need to be able to analyze what are the facts, what's the source, is it testable, is there a preponderance of evidence to this versus I heard it on Fox or, I heard it on.
Yeah. A lot of times debates center around what are the facts. But as I say in the book, sometimes we need to step back and first establish what are facts, like what sorts of statements are statement of fact. And, if you think about the debate around climate change, for example, a lot of the resistance to acknowledge that it's happening and human role in climate change is that a lot of the political right, for lack of a better term, assumes that if they acknowledge some of the facts, that the policy prescriptions are set in stone. For example, if I acknowledge that humans are affecting the climate, it means we can't have SUVs. That's not necessarily the case. In other words, acknowledging the facts would just be a starting point, at which point we come together and we say, okay, what do we want to do about this? But before that, we need to get into, there are people who say that the facts about the climate as we present them are merely opinions. And that's a much more difficult problem to deal with.
Right. So I'm going to take liberty and just tell you I interviewed an author of a book called The Parrot and the Igloo on climate science denial back to the 1800s. And he said the Moonies, the Washington Times, were the single biggest purveyor of climate science denial. And he paralleled, how big tobacco said smoking didn't cause cancer and et cetera. And people need to understand, if you're a PhD in English Lit, you are not qualified to talk about climate science. Like, this is not, the PhD does not equate with an expertise.
Well, this is a bigger issue because there's sort of two sides to this. Some call it a crisis of expertise. I don't know if I would call it that, but there's sort of two sides to it where, on the one hand, we need to be able to identify fallacious appeal to authority. And so an example of that would be someone with a PhD in something unrelated to climate science being interviewed as Dr. something.
Right.
and falsely being sort of perceived as an authority on an issue. So that's one problem.
Right.
The other problem is also a real one, which is a 5-minute corporate media debate where you have an actual climatologist, really an expert,
Right.
and then, someone who works for a fossil fuel think tank or something like that.
Yes.
And so real expertise does exist. And so it becomes a complicated and muddled text because it's sort of like we're saying that there are people presented as experts that are not, but also you're saying trust the experts. Well, it's a little more complicated than that, right? And that's the difficulty.
Yeah, and what you're saying is the media, the production companies, or the higher ups are doing false equivalences and giving equal time to BS, things that are just totally not true.
Right.
And I did my doctorate late in life in my 60s, so I learned what it's like to be a scholar, how you need to do a lit review, how to read journal articles and look for false, claims or references that are not solid, etc. And all I can say is that I think there's been a deliberate attack on science and on experts to serve the interests of the Christian nationalists, the creationists, the fossil fuel corporations, the Koch industries who want to muddle the water and try to say, no, we can't trust Fauci. He spent 50 years as a specialty, but no, he's flawed. And so you understand, I'm trying to get at the how people really we need experts. Like I consider you to be an expert in our social environment that we're living in. I mean, you breathe this stuff. You're interviewing top people. You're following the news. You're open-minded and want, to get to the heart of issues, and you feel a responsibility to be honest and to have integrity, so people will trust you and want to be part of your effort. And I respect that so much.
And one of the things with this that you're talking about is that many of us see some of these sort of nonsense claims and say, how could anyone fall for that? How could anyone believe it? But it's important to understand that a lot of times that's not really the goal. It's just as it's just as useful to make someone question whether there's a consensus, because it'll create political gridlock. So when you see like the climate science denier or the vaccine skeptic, whatever, anti-vaxxer, they don't have to convince you that vaccines cause autism or that humans have no role to play in climate change. It's enough to create doubt, because that will create political gridlock, which is just as effective for the businesses that depend on it not being accepted. And that's an important thing to understand.
That's a very good point. And I would just add that the uncertainty element creates more anxiety and fear.
Right.
And we know that our brains, we've evolved with an extra active amygdala for protection from danger. So we're going to pay attention to the negative news things. That's what goes viral, are those fear-inducing, disgusting, negative emotion things over stop and think. Is this plausible that Zelensky punched Trump out when they met in the Vatican? It's like, oh, we know there's AI. It's pretty slick, but, and to start with a default that you don't immediately like or reshare something just because it confirms, your cognitive bias, it confirms your current beliefs.
That one I didn't even hear about. Was that floating around?
Yeah, it's on social media. And these technologies are becoming so accessible to make really high quality deep fake videos where the voices sound real and the faces are real and they're not saying what they actually said or doing what they did.
Right.
And again, this brings up anxiety and uncertainty. And to a certain part of our brain, we want to shut down or tune out or follow someone who speaks with so much certainty. I know this, like no general or no economist. That there's that part of us that wants to believe that somebody knows what the hell's happening.
Well, and I think that's the appeal of a lot of conspiracy theories also,
right?
Which is, if you think of school shootings, for example, it's terrifying to think that there is an element of randomness of, does your kid go to or teach at the school that was unpredictably and randomly shot up? And what does this say about gun safety regulations? In a way, although it's terrifying, it could be a little more soothing that was a staged event. These things don't really happen randomly in this way.
Right.
This was whatever Alex Jones called it, or whatever the case may be. There's
Sandy
something
Hook.
About that can be more maybe satisfying or reassuring in a weird way.
Yeah, but also blame the other side for this made up, thing. And
right.
Did you see him when the trial was happening and they were confronting him with things, and he said, "I think I was psychotic," or I think
I remember that vaguely. I interviewed this lawyer, Mark Bankston, who was the plaintiff's lawyer in the big verdict against Alex Jones, and just the entire thing was, one detail is crazier than the last.
Yeah, for sure. So let's do a little bit more on the content in the book on this echo machine and your ideas for solutions, please.
Well, listen, one of the things that I point to is that a lot of the stereotypes about the sorts of societies that are often derided by the modern, kind of authoritarian right, aren't true. So Denmark is too small to apply what they do with healthcare to the United States. Well, maybe as a country, but we could do it at the state level. And then if you think about these as 50 Denmark-like systems, you actually start to realize that the impediment isn't really the size of the country, but it's that Denmark actually is much more like the blue states. Denmark is a lot more like Massachusetts and Connecticut and New York and Illinois, insofar as its human development index, which includes infrastructure, access to healthcare, life expectancy, etc. A lot of the blue states could quite easily adapt to systems like what we see in Denmark or Sweden. The problem is a lot of the red states that are subsidized by blue states, that have often one industry, that have inferior infrastructure, inferior education systems, and inferior healthcare systems on average. There are exceptions, like Florida's education is pretty good. Okay, fine. But on average, these are the sort of things we see. The red states would have more trouble because they already are in an inferior economic and infrastructure position. But the idea that we can't do what Denmark does because we're too big falls pretty flat. Another example, we can't do a lot of the things Sweden does with education and infrastructure because Sweden's very homogenous. Everybody's Swedish, they're white Swedish, and the United States is too diverse. First question is, okay, but so why? Why, even if that's true, why does that prevent us from doing a lot of the things Sweden has done? But more importantly, something like 20-something% of Swedish residents are foreign born. And, you start kind of picking a lot of these things apart and you realize that there's really no there. These are things that are repeated for decades without really looking deeply. So that was part of the goal of that section of the book.
Yeah, that was really helpful. And the happiness index in the Nordic countries is much higher. Finland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden.
Despite the cold weather, there's a lot of it's funny, in doing a lot of the research, you inevitably stumble across the statements about how it's not true that when you move to a cold, dark place, you aren't as happy. And indeed, a lot of these countries are cold and dark a lot of the year, but people are pretty happy.
And they're happy because they have trust and they have community. They have shared values. they pay a lot more in taxes, but they get free education, free health care.
Yeah, and sometimes they don't pay that much more. I mean, I'm at a hotel a few years ago. I met a guy from Australia who I think shared that he made about 85,000 US dollar equivalent at the time. And he talked a little bit about his effective tax rate. And, it wasn't dramatically different from someone living in an average state, paying some state income tax plus federal tax at $85,000. But it does include the social safety net that we don't have. So in some cases, you're not even really paying that much more.
Right. Oh, I have so many questions I want to ask you, and I want to go off your book and talk about some like Canada and the election. Is it okay to ask you just because the election just happened? What's your take on that? I'm sure you've done a show already on that.
I mean, I think Trump really has had a lot of influence in hurting the conservatives and in helping Mark Carney become prime minister. Just a few months ago, it seemed almost inevitable that Pierre Poilievre was going to become the prime minister. Not only did he not, but he lost his seat. Yeah. And a lot of this was Canadians seeing what Trump was doing to Canada, seeing Poilievre as the sort of mini Trump, a sort of analogy that he tried to distance himself from in the later periods of this election. And Canadians said, no, you know what? We don't hate Justin Trudeau as much as we thought, and we're going to go with the Liberal Party once again. And I think Trump is squarely to blame for that.
Yeah, and I think he messaged actually yesterday. We're recording it the day after the election. Trump actually said something about Poilievre, and Poilievre was like, we don't want to amplify that,
right?
And such. But and the tariffs are just such a bad idea.
They are, yeah. And I'm not one of the things that stemmed from the whole tariff fiasco is kind of assertions that the left is against tariffs in principle. And of course, that's very much untrue. The way I've thought about it is tariffs are a tool. If you say, is a tool good, you have to then ask, well, for what job, right? If you have a hammer, if that's the only tool you have, and there's a bunch of nails, it's the right tool. If you're trying to bake a cheesecake, it's not the right tool. And so, you can imagine scenarios. Now I hear this a lot. I've been talking about this for 6 months, but now I hear this example given elsewhere. If you identified, we have a national security risk in getting semiconductors from Taiwan. And the risk is China takes over and overnight says, no more semiconductors for the United States. We're in a really rough position. Yeah. So a thoughtful approach where we say over the next 8 years, we want to onshore semiconductors. We will have a ramp up tariff on Taiwanese semiconductors. We will have a subsidy for building that manufacturing capacity in the United States. At the end of this 8-year period, we will have brought this supply chain back home. It'll be a little more expensive, but we'll subsidize it for national security reasons. That's a good use of the tool. Right. These blanket tariffs, even on islands that have only penguins, it's just not serious.
Right. Right. And then we have Wall Street going, what are you doing? You're ruining the strength of the dollar. Right. The Canadian dollar to American dollar, the American dollar is 0.72 of the Canadian dollar. It used to be more than the dollar.
Is that right? I didn't even see that it was that bad. Let's see.
It's that bad as of yesterday when I checked.
Yeah. No, 0.72. You're right. Yeah.
And, people are seeing the erosion of their savings and the threats of their Social Security that they were counting on, that they were paying in, etc. Can I ask you a few more topical things? Because he just did an executive order pretty much like laying the foundation for martial law. Did you see that?
I didn't see that yet. I want to look at that more deeply before commenting. I got a lot of emails about it, yeah.
It's he says in it that it will take 90 days to implement, but he's more or less authorizing the military for use as political, for domestic enforcement processes, whatever.
Which I understand, based on the Posse Comitatus Act, is not legal, but I don't know if he's found some novel legal argument for why he can do it.
Yeah, the Supreme Court will find some, possibly or something.
Yeah.
And Dave, I saw you messaging about how you were advised to be careful not to leave the U.S. because you might not be able to be let back in.
It's not that I wouldn't get let back in ultimately. I'm a naturalized U.S. citizen. And so I do think, at least for now, although maybe in 2 weeks I'll be saying something different, I think at least for now I wouldn't have an issue ultimately being let back in. But we have a growing number of anecdotes of individuals who are naturalized citizens being temporarily detained at the border, coming back into the United States, being scrutinized, electronic devices being looked at. So the advice I got was, make contact with an immigration attorney that would be available within a relatively short amount of time if you were to have such an issue. And potentially, don't even travel with like your main phone or laptop.
Yeah, burner
Use
phone.
some kind of a flip phone just for calls and texts or something like that, because the border authority is different than like a police detention domestically.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I see them messaging more and more about you really, if you're at a protest, you may want to wear a mask because they're doing surveillance, and we don't know what the images are going to be used down the road to say you were at a terrible protest and therefore we're arresting you. I mean, I tend to be the glass is half empty anyway type of, it's my genetic heritage or whatever. So my fantasies of negative things, it goes pretty far. The El Salvador terrorist prison scared the crap out of me, honestly.
Yeah. No, that's my instinct as well. I'm Jewish, so we are sort of a
guilty
glass half empty sort of population.
Yeah. I didn't realize you were Jewish. Anyway, I'm not surprised. Social justice matters, wanting to help others and make the world a better place. I know that we have a few more minutes, and I know that there's more that I haven't gotten to at the latter chapters of your book. I was listening to chapter 8. Can you give us a little taste to get people interested in buying the Echo Machine?
Well, I think, it's, first of all, extremely important to understand how we got to where we are. So that's one of the things that I hope that the book does. Number two, I understand the feelings of despondency and wanting to give up after losing everything in November and seeing the direction things are taking. I urge people in the book, and I think I make the case for it in the end, to resist that urge, because ceding power to the worst of the worst only makes things even worse. And so, when at the individual level, when people call my show and say, hey, I live in Texas, I've got a trans kid, I'm thinking about getting out. Get out, right? I'm never going to tell an individual, stay and suffer because of some great... At the same time, at the population level, we do need people to stay and fight. And so I think that there's the difference here between the retail and the wholesale strategy. And at a wholesale level, I don't believe that this is the time to tune out. Saying, hey, weekends, I don't pay attention to this stuff for mental health reasons. Great. I think all of that is phenomenal.
Yes.
But at the same time, we do have to stay engaged here unless we want the worst people to remain in power.
Yeah. Active resistance is critical. Absolutely. People are moving. I live in Northampton, as you know. We bumped into each other when you were visiting. People are moving to Northampton who are trans from red states because they don't feel safe there.
Yep.
And at least at my temple, we're helping, people get relocated.
Yeah.
So, it is what it is. What about this, the tech bros and Musk? Can we talk for a minute about, long-termism and transhumanism and populating Mars? And
listen, I think space exploration is both fascinating and a worthwhile endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I don't think that going to Mars is a solution of any kind for Homo sapiens at this point.
Right.
And even if you're thinking really long term, it's not a solution anyway, because when the sun expands and engulfs the Earth, it's going to mostly make Mars uninhabitable also.
Right.
So it's not a short-term solution and it's not a long-term solution. Is it a very interesting potential medium-term bridge with which humanity will learn so many things about what it would take to go elsewhere? Yet we're talking about very long periods of time,
Right.
but it can't be used as a substitute for problems on Earth right now. And I think that's the scary part of it.
Yeah, I agree. I did you happen to come across Tech Agnostic, the book by the Harvard MIT humanist chaplain Greg Epstein?
You know, I know Greg, and I haven't read the book, but it's on my list. And yeah, I mean, it sounds interesting.
Highly recommend you have him on. And I really think that he said, you know, big tech is the new world religion. People used to walk around like this. Now they're walking around looking at their phones.
Right.
And some people are looking at AI as the God, you know, that AI will tell us the truth and what we need to do. And,
right.
You know, so many scholars like Harari are like, this is a tool that's out of control.
Yeah, I mean, again, to go back to Neil Postman, it seems to me that AI can do so many interesting and useful things. I think it's going to be better at taking a look at a picture of a mole and telling you with very good accuracy whether this is something you need to get biopsied or not. I mean, I think there's a lot of things it's going to do really well, but it doesn't really give us answers to sort of the biggest sociocultural questions of our day that we're dealing with. And it can't be seen as a substitute for so many other things that humans are contending with. So I think we need to absolutely harness and maximize the good and useful things it can do, but use regulation and sort of sociocultural understanding to limit the bad.
Yeah. I'm with you, brother. I just listened to your Undivided Attention podcast. It's one that I listen to regularly with Center for Humane Technology. They were talking about education and children and AI and how much young people, by not learning to read, by not exercising their brains, by relying on answers that they're asking, it's shortening our attention span, and it's not going to be good for human development.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. That part seems clear.
Yep. So what's your best hope for what people who are listening to your show and my show? What's your best hope for action, like wished for things to happen, and so that I really would like to find out what's keeping you going.
Well, I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic in it for a few reasons. Number one, in the immediate aftermath of the election, independent progressive media saw a little bit of an exodus of audience. It lasted like 3 days.
I remember.
And we were all worried. What's happening here?
I remember.
Everybody's come back in droves.
Yeah.
Everybody's doing better than ever. And a lot of it, I believe, is people that left MSNBC and CNN and they're re-engaging now, but they're re-engaging with something different. So that makes me optimistic. Number two, the rally crowds that people like AOC and Bernie and others are getting. There's no election this year. These are not, protests in the traditional sense. These are rallies where we're hearing ideas and policy. The attendance is very much making me optimistic. And also the number of young people that are starting to run for office. I just interviewed a guy today, Isaiah Martin, who's running in Texas's 18th district. Brilliant young guy. The fact that more people are running for office and sort of recognizing the call for maybe a little bit of a generational change in the Democratic Party, I think that's super interesting as well. So I do think that there are things here to be optimistic about.
I need to ask you this, and I was just on Michael Cohen's podcast, and I love Michael, and I've been on his show, and he's been on my show, but we have a fundamental disagreement of facts.
I'm seeing him soon, so let's hear what this is and see how.
Well, his experience when he was with Trump was that Trump first went to Russia in the 90s 2 times. He's not a Russian agent. They had nothing to do with the 2016 election. And my information is that he went in the 80s and got recruited by the KGB in the 80s, not as an agent, but as an asset. And that Russia was all over the 2016 election with Susan Wiles doing a lot of the being in charge. What sayest thou about Russia and Trump?
I can't honestly say right now that I have the evidence to support your view. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying I haven't seen good reason to believe that. I think that Trump's support of Russia or indifference to its authoritarianism is driven primarily by Trump is just personally very impressed with Putin and people like Putin. I think that's a big driver of Trump's deference towards Russia. And I think it's abundantly clear that in 2016, Russia had a preference, and the preference was Trump. And it's because Trump would sort of humiliate the United States, call into question the state of our democracy, etc. So I do think that Russia had an interest in Trump winning in 2016, but I don't think it was Trump and Putin scheming together for it. I think it was Russia saying, let's do what we can to push the United States towards Trump. And if it's social media campaigns or stories that help Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton or whatever the case may be, I think it was that sort of influence. That's what I can sort of defend right now.
Yeah, I have a different opinion, and I'm happy to send you some of my sources and get your feedback. Because the Mueller report named a whole bunch of Russian agents who were actively involved in the election. And I interviewed Craig Unger and Yuri Shvets on American Compromat, and Yuri says, I was much higher up in the KGB than Vladimir was, and I was there when Donald Trump got recruited. And 2 other former KGB officials have also come forward and said when they were there.
Oh, I would love to check that out, and I'd even want to interview them.
We'll be in touch, because there's also a former campaign staffer that I interviewed. She read The Cult of Trump. Right now, she's afraid for her life, so I don't want to mention her name, but I did on Michael's podcast. And she's happy to talk with him, off public stuff about Susan Wiles and her direct experience, because Susie was her boss. And the Russians were all over the supplying RVs for Trump in the 2016 election.
Well, I would never turn away information.
Yeah, again, it's that's the whole thing about being open-minded to evidence, and does the evidence stand up to facts? And it's thank you for your open-mindedness. I know that we're going to need to wrap up in 5 minutes, but I really want to just say, you're sticking your neck out. Yes, you have a show. Yes, people are subscribing. You're making some money, but you really are a major force in opposing the narrative of the Trump cult. And I thank you, brother, for doing this work. I really admire you and respect you.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, I mean it. And thank you for this book. And my wish is that MAGA folks will read it too. And I'm not sure how to get them to read it, because you make your biases as a good scholar. You say at the front, I'm a progressive, I'm a liberal, I believe in women's rights and gay rights, etc. But you're also, down to earth, and you're a mensch, if I can use that term.
Well, I appreciate that. And, I'm starting to think about a second book that maybe will be couched in a less partisan manner, so that maybe we can pull in more Trump folks to read it.
Yeah, and maybe think about just writing an article or something. Just do a shorter thing that gets people thinking. For me, as we're wrapping up, I'll just say I've been telling people forever, because I'm a former cult member, the worst thing you can do is call a cult member names and morons and brainwashed and try to persuade them with facts that their leader is wrong or their doctrine is wrong. And the best thing that you can do is stay respectful and curious and warm and ask questions in a sincere way. Listen to their answer and ask for a follow-up and just stay in their life, because I predict there'll be millions of people exiting MAGA in the coming months. That's my hope, because people who voted for him, who were super MAGA, have now lost their jobs, many, or they've lost their USAID subsidies.
Right.
And at the point they're going to lose their health care, or they're going to lose their Social Security, or they see their dollar going down, they see prices of things going up. I predict there's going to be a lot of disillusioned folks. And I want to message, we welcome.
Right.
Not, we told you so, what took you so long, but just like, welcome. We're Americans. Let's regroup,
Absolutely. Let's hope.
Let's hope. Let's do this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And lastly, before we one last time, the Echo Machine, How Right-Wing Extremism Created a Post-Truth America, David Pakman. Go to YouTube, The David Pakman Show, and check out his good work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Hassan here. It's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the super thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind. Only you should control it.